Chapter 12. Matt sat up in bed and glanced at his clock. It was almost 1 in the morning. For a moment he lay still, wondering what had woken him. Then he heard the whimpering, followed by the sound of scratching claws. Roswell. He groaned and threw back the covers. Roswell stood on his back legs, resting his front paws on the front door. He turned when Matt entered the room to give him a mournful look, then resumed whining and scratching. The brown paint on the door already showed several fresh scratches. "Stop it," Matt ordered. "Go to bed." Roswell tucked his tail between his legs and continued to whimper and scratch. "You know there's such a thing as a security deposit," Matt snapped, glaring at the damage to the door. He found the leash and clipped it to Roswell's collar, then dragged him back to the bed he'd made in the corner using the blankets from Mrs. Brinkerhoff's suitcase. Matt tied the leash around the leg of the sofa, making sure he left plenty of slack. "Lie down," he ordered, pointing at the bed. But Roswell just stood staring at him dejectedly. "She's coming back," Matt told him. "She'll be back, and I promise it won't be soon enough for me." Roswell stood there. "Fine, suit yourself," Matt shrugged. "Only be quiet, okay?" He went back to his room, shut the door, and climbed under the covers. He waited for sleep, only it wouldn't come. From the living room came the sound of more whining. "He'll be fine. He's got plenty of leash. He'll eventually get tired and go to sleep." Only, what if he strangles himself? Images of Roswell wrapping himself up tighter and tighter in the leash invaded Matt's imagination until finally, with a muttered curse, he kicked the covers off again and went back to the living room. Roswell hadn't moved. He looked up and managed a brief tail wag at Matt. "Lie down," Matt ordered, more forcefully this time. "It's time to sleep." The dog still didn't move. "Thanks a lot, Aaron," Matt growled under his breath. He was halfway tempted to drag the dumb dog down the hall and bang on her door. Let her deal with this. But that would only cause problems for Sarah. "Bed. Sleep," he ordered. Roswell answered with a small whine. Sighing, Matt unhooked the leash from the couch. He dragged the dog and the blankets into his bedroom, plopping them in the corner. "Fine, sleep there," he grumbled, unhooking the leash from Roswell's collar. Roswell gave him a satisfied grunt and flopped down on the blankets. Grumbling all the way, Matt returned to his own bed. He was about to drift off when... lick. Something wet washed over his hand and he jerked awake. Roswell's white fur gleamed in the streetlight filtering through the blinds as he stood by the bed. They were practically eye to eye. "What do you want?" Matt moaned. Roswell licked his hand again. Matt rolled over with a thump, turning his back on Roswell. "Go away," he ordered. He could hear the dog pacing around the room, his toenails clicking on the wood floor. Well, the dumb dog could wander for the rest of the night. He didn't care. He realized the clicking toenails had stopped an instant before. Oof! Something heavy and furry slammed into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Roswell stood on the bed, or rather on Matt, one paw pressing painfully into his stomach. "Get off!" Matt gasped, shoving at the dog's leg. Roswell moved, but only to begin sniffing the blankets. "No," Matt said. "No, no, no." But Roswell had apparently found a spot he liked. He flopped down with a grunt and put his head on his paws. His big blue eyes shone in the dim light. "You've got to be kidding me," Matt muttered. Aaron was going to pay for this. He'd text her every 30 seconds until she replied. If he wasn't going to sleep tonight, neither would she. But before he could reach for his phone, Roswell leaped off the bed and began whining at the door. Somehow Matt knew this was his bathroom whine. Matt growled in frustration and threw back the blankets. He rummaged around the floor for his shoes, sighing. So much for sleep. Chapter 13. Matt was waiting outside the theater when Erin finished rehearsal on Tuesday night. She'd already changed into a pair of yoga pants and athletic shoes. Though maybe it was what she usually wore to rehearsal. He didn't really know. "Are you hungry? We can stop and eat first," he offered as he held the car door for her. Erin shook her head. "I had an energy bar about an hour ago. Besides, isn't it a bad idea to eat right before you exercise?" "Usually." Matt grinned. "But it's not like we're going to be overexerting ourselves much tonight." "Speak for yourself," Erin said, a mischievous gleam growing in her eyes. "I'm going to be a freaking rock star." She laughed about the pun the whole way to the rock climbing gym. Her weakness for puns was one of the things he loved about her. At the gym, they met Rand, their climbing instructor. He was very tall and skinny with ropey muscles and a bushy red beard. "Have either of you been climbing before?" he asked. Matt and Erin shook their heads. Rand pointed to the 40-foot wall behind him, studded with hand and footholds. "We'll use the green route," he said, his hand following the zigzag pattern the green holds made to the ceiling. "Most of the holds are jugs and slopers, but there are a few crimps just to give you a feel for it." "Jugs and what?" Erin asked. "Slopers and crimps," Rand said again. "Different sizes of holds. Jugs are the biggest and easiest. Crimps are the smallest and most challenging." He showed them how to balance their weight and use their leg muscles to move up the wall instead of pulling with their arms. Then they tried a few practice climbs, only venturing a few feet above the padded floor. When Rand was satisfied with their progress, he moved on to the harnesses. "Oh, this is super attractive," Erin laughed as she fastened the climbing harness around her hips and shot a glance at Matt. Matt felt a stab of hope. She was worried about looking attractive in front of him. "You're the one who picked climbing from my spreadsheet," he said, going for nonchalant. Erin in workout clothes always made his heart skip. And she looked very cute tonight, with her tight black pants and carnation pink tank top. Her hair pulled into a high ponytail that swung against her neck whenever she moved her head. "I forgot you had to wear harnesses." She made a face. Rand showed them how to hold the rope so whoever was climbing had enough slack to move, but not enough to hit the ground in a fall. Then they took turns practicing. "Come on, you can do it!" Erin yelled when Matt paused at a tricky spot more than halfway up the wall. A bell rang and Matt glanced up in time to see a kid, probably not more than 12, posing for a selfie at the top of the advanced wall, which was a warren of colored crimps and slopers. Actually, it could hardly even be called a wall since it had an overhang taller than the kid. Matt grunted and shifted his weight, silently cursing himself for including climbing on the list at all. This is what I get for trying to be a show-off. "Are you okay?" Erin called to him. His calves were on fire. He'd pay for this tomorrow. "Fine," he called back. "Just—" He winced as he stretched his right leg to reach the next foothold. "Busy pulling muscles." The sound of her laughter made it all worthwhile. On her turn, Erin stuck to the beginner course until she was about 15 feet up. "Can I switch to the yellow ones now?" she called down to Rand. "Sure, if you think you can handle it," Rand replied. It was obvious that Rand also appreciated the sight of Erin in workout clothes, and Matt didn't like it. He made a mental note to dock his tip. A little bit. "Be careful," he called, then immediately felt like a killjoy. Like a fussy old lady who wouldn't let you slide down the stairs or walk along the top rail of a fence because she was afraid you'd get hurt. Erin did pretty well for a few more feet, then stopped. The yellow course must be harder than it looked. "Do you want to switch back to green?" Matt asked. She shook her head. "I can do it." But she couldn't. A few more feet and her head drooped. "I'm stuck," she admitted. Matt could see her leg muscles spasming as she balanced on her tiptoes on a narrow sloper. "There's a green jug to your left," Rand called. "If you stretch your leg, you can reach it." Aaron tried, but Matt could see how exhausted she was. "Do you want to come down?" he asked. Aaron nodded. "Just let go," Matt prompted, his hands tightening on the belay rope. "Maybe I should," Rand began, reaching for the rope. "It's okay, I've got it," Matt said quickly. "Let go, Aaron," he urged again. "I've got you." He planted his feet as she pushed away from the wall. The rope slid smoothly through his hand as he brought her safely down. "Sorry," she said when she reached the bottom. "I guess I'm not quite as tough as I thought." "You did really well for your first time," Rand assured her. "Thanks," Aaron said, but she was looking at Matt, and he knew she was thanking him, not Rand. Thanking him for being there, ready to catch her if something went wrong. His heart warmed. "That was really fun," Aaron said later as they walked across the parking lot to the car. "Tiring, but fun." "I'd do it again," Matt said. "Me too. When can we come back?" she said eagerly. He paused. "Really? You liked it that much?" "Well, yeah," she said. "It's fun spending time with you." His pulse began to pound, and he stopped to face her. "So, which is it? The rock climbing or spending time with me?" he said softly. It was the wrong thing to say. Her face fell, and she took a step back. "It's both. I like doing new things, and I like hanging out with you. Why isn't that okay?" Hanging out. Hello, friend zone. "Sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable," he amended. "I like hanging out with you too." She bit her bottom lip anxiously. "So we're cool?" Matt nodded, disappointment heavy in his chest. Well, what did he expect to happen? He'd take her out once or twice on a real date, and she'd suddenly become as crazy about him as he was about her? "Yes, that's exactly what I thought," he confessed to Roswell after he'd dropped Aaron off at her apartment and taken the dog for his walk. It had been on the tip of his tongue to remind her that she'd promised to help with the dog, but he didn't. He needed some time to think, and he'd found talking to Roswell to be surprisingly therapeutic. "I thought my spreadsheet would impress her," he told Roswell. Like she'd go, "Hey, Matt is so awesome with his art and his rock climbing and his spreadsheet. I should totally reconsider this dumb idea I have that we can't be more than friends." Roswell paid no attention. He sniffed around the park looking for a place to do his business. Matt shivered. It was past late, and the temperature was dropping fast. "You're totally right. I'm an idiot," Matt said. The dog lifted his leg, seemed to think better of it, and moved on. "It's grass," Matt burst out. "There's grass here, grass there. And look," he pointed. "Tree, bush, bush, tree. You're not creating high art, just get on with it." Roswell ignored him. Chapter 14. Erin threw her arms over her head and stretched. Her muscles were sore from rock climbing, and sitting still for so long wasn't helping. "Think they're about done?" she whispered to Sasha and Jocelyn, throwing a glance at the director's table, where Mona was involved in a heated conversation with Jacob. "I doubt it. What a diva," Sasha grumbled, giving Jacob a dark look. "It is pretty close to opening," Erin pointed out. "Yeah, and we're all dealing with the same pressure," Sasha replied. "You have a bigger part than Jacob, and you're not having a meltdown every other second." Erin got to her feet. "I'm going to run across the street for hot chocolate. You want anything?" The line at the coffee shop took forever. She scuffed the toe of her shoe along the tile floor as she waited, her mind returning, automatically it seemed, to Matt. He was getting pushier. How many more times would he let her avoid talking about their relationship? He was demanding an answer, and she didn't have one. At least not one that made sense. She always claimed they didn't have any chemistry, so what was that urge she'd felt in the theater to bury her face in his neck? Hormones? He was a good-looking guy, in a boy-next-door kind of way, with his blonde hair and blue eyes. He was fit and muscular in all the right places. He made her laugh, and he was her best friend. Plus, they'd spent the day together bonding. Wasn't the urge to get closer physically a natural reaction? But none of that was reason enough to jump into a relationship with him. The truth was, she was holding out for her prince, the guy who would burst into her life and sweep her off her feet. She didn't want love to come stealing in softly. She wanted it to land like a cannonball. And she'd known Matt too long for that. The line was long, and by the time she'd paid for the drinks, Aaron feared she'd pushed it too far. Mona did not take kindly to anyone who put her behind schedule. Aaron darted back across the street, waving apologetically to a driver who had to stop and wait for her. Mona glanced over and saw her come in, but she was still arguing with Jacob. Aaron plunked back down beside Jocelyn and Sasha and handed out the drinks. "Still?" she whispered. Now he started complaining about how the changes are affecting his character. Keeps saying it's not him. Hasn't he ever seen beaches? Jocelyn muttered. She pulled the lid off her black coffee and blew on it. "What?" Sasha asked. Jocelyn rolled her eyes. "Not you too. There's a scene in Beaches where Bette Midler is complaining that her character wasn't her. The director says something like, 'Act like it,'" Aaron and Jocelyn said together. "Oh, yeah, I think I remember it. Barely." Sasha gave them a strange look. "What do you two do? 80s movies night marathons?" "That sounds like a fantastic idea," Aaron said. "Let's do it. How about this weekend?" Jocelyn replaced her lid and took a sip. "How about we get through opening night first?" she suggested. "Oh, right." Aaron blushed. The biggest night of her career was in less than 2 weeks, and she was plotting the return of acid-washed jeans and frosty blue eyeshadow. "I'm not asking you to make any major changes, Jacob," Mona said loudly, her tone clearly indicating her patience was running as thin as her penciled eyebrows. "But when you signed your contract, we told you this was a work in progress and you should expect some fluidity." "Fluidity is one thing. This is something else," Jacob shot back. "The rewrites are going to change the way my character sees the entire second act. How am I supposed to fix that in 2 weeks?" Mona ground her teeth. "You're an actor," she grated, "so act like it." Bingo! So she has seen Beaches. Jocelyn held up her cup, and Aaron bumped it with her hot chocolate, making a dull, cardboardy thunk. 3-1 he quits, Sasha whispered. "Not if we open in 8 days and Mitchell is their only other choice," Aaron said confidently. "Well, if I were Mona, I'd have fired his whiny butt long before now," Jocelyn replied. "I need a break." Jacob threw down his script and stomped out of the room. "Betcha," Sasha said, raising one eyebrow at them. Chapter 15. The studio was closed on Sundays, but Matt was there anyway, working on a new project. He'd been awake most of the night sketching the idea for a Christmas wreath. Size, materials, and most importantly, price. It would be in the style of Dale Chihuly, with dozens of green glass swirls joined to form a single wreath. He'd even planned a big red bow. Chihuly's work sold for hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars. A fortune. Matt didn't kid himself. He was nowhere near that level. But even a fraction of a fortune would make a difference, and would mean the studio's survival. He'd completed 6 of the green swirls that would make up the wreath, and had many more to go. He was pouring more green frit onto the table when his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Aaron. I'm outside, she said when he answered. Can I come in? Sure, just a sec. He glanced into the showroom. She stood by the glass front door. He hadn't heard her knocking over the noise of the studio. Sorry to bug you when you're working, she said when he'd opened the door for her. She wore blue and gray Aztec-printed leggings under a long black sweater and black boots. Her hair hung loose to the middle of her back. No problem, Matt said. What's up? Erin bit her lip. Things have been weird lately. I wanted to make sure everything is okay between us. He nodded. I know. I've been pushing you too hard. I'm sorry. They'd only done 2 activities from his not boring spreadsheet. Moving too fast would only drive her away. I have the play right now. It's not a good time to be starting anything new, she said carefully. I understand. She breathed a sigh of relief, then looked through the window separating the showroom and the studio. What are you making? A wreath. Can I see? He led her into the studio and opened the leer, the temperature-controlled kiln where pieces were set to cool. I'll wire these together to make the wreath, he explained, pointing to the row of green swirls. Hopefully it comes together the way I imagine it. It will, Erin said quickly. Matt closed the leer. Well, it's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. We make a lot harder stuff than... He trailed off, aware of how lame he must sound, as if he was searching for a compliment, but refusing to accept it after she gave one. He busied himself with organizing his tools. Can I do it? Erin asked. Do what? Make something? He dropped a wooden block into the bucket of water. Sure, if you want to. She beamed and shrugged out of her coat, hanging it on a hook next to his while he dug around in a box for leather work gloves and an extra pair of safety glasses. The glasses were dusty, and he rubbed them off on his shirt tail before handing them to her. Can I make one of those swirly things? She asked as she slipped the glasses on. That might be a bit too hard at first. Matt thought back to his own beginning lessons with his father patiently showing him how to work with the glass, how to gather it, shape it, and turn it into something beautiful. What about a flower? A flower? Erin shot a glance toward the showroom. Can you show me one? We don't have any we've made for sale, Matt said. They'd had glass flowers in the showroom before, and they usually ended up in the dumpster. A flower took about 3 minutes to make, not exactly the craftsmanship and quality most buyers were looking for. Okay, Erin said enthusiastically. What do I do first? Pick a color. Matt swept his hand toward the jars of frit, tiny chips that melted into the clear glass to give a piece its color. Lined up on shelves by the showroom window, the jars resembled a supply of sprinkles for a giant's bakery. Yellow, Erin said immediately. My favorite. Matt knew that. He smiled and reached for the jar labeled saffron, unstopped the lid, and poured a thin line of yellow chips onto the metal table next to the furnace. Stay back a little, he warned as he reached for a blowing pipe. The heat from the furnace blasted their faces when he opened the door. Erin hovered near his elbow as he pulled a gather from the pool. Sit there, he said loudly over the furnace, jerking his head toward the bench. She did, and he brought the pipe over, the glass glowing on the end. Roll it back and forth, he demonstrated, and try to keep it from drooping. Erin's eyes narrowed in concentration, and she caught the tip of her tongue between her teeth as she rolled the pipe along the arms of the bench. He hid his smile at the lopsided wad of glass forming on the end. She was actually doing pretty well for a beginner. When she'd rolled it a few more times, he took the glass to the furnace, heated it again, and rolled it in the yellow frit. Then it was back to the bench. Pick up that paddle. He pointed with his chin at the flat steel paddle lying on the seat next to her. He showed her how to press the paddle against the glass on the end of the pipe to make a cone shape with a flat bottom. Then he gestured to a pair of long, thin pliers. Now we're going to make the petals. Pull where I show you, he instructed, picking up his own pair. He made marks in the soft glass with his pliers, and she followed behind him, grabbing the mark he'd made and pulling. The glass got harder and less malleable as it cooled, and soon Aaron had to use both hands. He couldn't help grinning at the effort it took. He could have finished the whole thing in about 30 seconds, but it was more fun to watch her do it. He made a few more trips to the furnace to reheat the glass and had her do a few more rounds of pulling. Her excitement grew along with the flour. When the flour had grown to the size of a dinner plate, Matt used a pair of long tongs to give it a slight funnel shape. Then he upended the pipe, using the tongs and gravity to stretch the blossom and create the stem. A final twist, and it was finished. Matt carried the flour to a table and laid it gently on a pile of lamb's wool, then used pincers to cut the glass from the pipe. Come here, he gestured to Aaron. She joined him quickly, and he plucked a small torch from the table and handed it to her. I'm gonna light it. Ready? She nodded, her eyes wide. He turned on the gas and touched the striker to the tip of the torch. Flames shot out the end, and he put his hand over Aaron's, directing the flame to the bottom of the flour. The glass melted like snow on a hot stove, sealing and smoothing the end of the stem. Matt turned off the torch and grinned at Aaron. There you go. Wow! I can't believe I made that! She gave a little hop on her toes and clapped with excitement as she moved around the table, studying her flour from all sides. When can I take it home? Tomorrow. He slipped on a heavy-duty oven mitt and laid the flour in the leer next to his glass swirls. Aaron stood at his shoulder, gazing proudly at her flour. It's so awesome! Now you do something. What do you mean? She gestured toward the bench. Make something. I want to see how it's done for reals. That is how it's done for reals, he said. No, I want to see how it's done by a professional, she countered. Please? At first he resisted. It felt like showing off. But he could never withstand her coaxing for long. I'll show you how to make a piece of the wreath, he finally agreed. Aaron moved out of the way while Matt prepared his tools, then collected another gather and took it to the table. His movements were smooth and sure, fluid, like the glass. He rolled the glowing ball in the green frit he'd laid down, then brought the pipe to his mouth. A second later, a small bubble appeared in the glowing glass, and Matt used tongs to pull and shape it into a swirl. Considering how long it had taken her to make a flower, Matt was lightning fast. I can't believe how quickly it starts to solidify, she said as she studied the swirl, now resting on the lamb's wool. It was about the size of her arm, and rapidly cooling from glowing orange into the lime green of the frit. Yep, you have to move pretty quickly, Matt said with a smile. She tiptoed and kissed him quickly on the cheek. Thank you, this was fun. You're welcome. He stepped away from her and began cleaning up. Want to get some lunch? Yeah, but don't you have more work to do? Aaron asked. I didn't mean to interrupt your day. He stacked the pipes along the wall. No, it's fine. I was just messing around anyway. He turned to her, and his blue eyes seemed to burn as they looked at each other across the room. I'm glad you came. Butterflies exploded in Aaron's stomach. The urge to go to him, weave her fingers through his hair, pull his head toward hers, was almost overpowering. Maybe, what if she did? She shifted her weight, preparing to take a step toward him, just as the row of blowpipes slipped and fell to the concrete floor with a crash. They both jumped. Sorry, Matt said quickly. Give me a few minutes to clean up. If you want to wait in the showroom, I'll hurry. I could help, Aaron offered. Nah, Matt shook his head. It'll be faster to do it myself. Aaron nodded and went to wander among the pieces in the showroom. She had a whole new respect for Matt's artistry now, but she was in too much turmoil to focus on the pieces for long. It was only an innocent kiss on the cheek. So why were her lips on fire? And why was her stomach so fluttery? Why was she imagining what could have happened if she'd taken that step toward him? "Where to for lunch?" Matt asked several minutes later. He'd washed up, but apparently didn't have a comb, and his sandy hair bore finger marks from where he'd unsuccessfully tried to smooth it. Her fingers itched to tousle it further. She bit the inside of her cheek and tried to think about food instead of Matt's hair. How about Silver Moon? The Silver Moon Diner was a local hangout that served breakfast all day and must have employed Morgantown's entire population of goth teenagers. Their server was a skinny girl with black lipstick and a skull tattoo under her ear. "What are your plans for the rest of the day?" Matt asked when their food arrived. "You don't have rehearsal, do you?" Erin shook her head. She was focusing on cutting her stack of Dutch apple French toast, which was in real danger of tipping over. "No rehearsal on Sunday. What about you? Want to see a movie?" Matt checked his watch. "Actually, I'd better get home and walk Roswell." "Oh, right." Erin winced. She hadn't exactly forgotten Roswell, but she had left too much of his care to Matt. "I can take him today if you want." "When is Mrs. Brinkerhoff coming home anyway?" Erin's stomach dropped. "I don't know. I forgot to ask." "Wait, what?" Matt's fork clattered onto his plate. "You offered to take care of someone's dog? Indefinitely?" "Yeah." Erin felt her face grow hot. He stared at her in silence for a long moment, then broke into helpless laughter. "Only you." "I'm sorry. She's old and didn't give me all the details, and I forgot. I've been busy." His laughter intensified. "So, we know exactly what brand of specialized and expensive dog food Roswell eats. He likes the red chew toy, but not the orange. Prefers to sleep with his butt next to my head, and if left alone too long, he will pee all over the place. But we have no idea when his owner will be back." Erin scowled. "You don't have to rub it in." Matt wiped away tears of laughter. "I'm not rubbing it in. I don't know. Only you," he said again. Her sense of shame was building. "Now you sound like my mother. Or like my whole family, actually." "What do you mean?" "They used to call it pulling an errand," she said, unable to keep the hint of bitterness from her voice. "Every time someone did something stupid or airheaded or made a mistake, they'd all holler, 'Way to pull an errand,' or something like that. They still do, in fact." Her voice caught on the words. His laughter stopped instantly, and he reached across the table for her hand. "I didn't mean it that way. I'm sorry." "I know." Her fingers tightened around his as she used her napkin to catch the sudden tears in her eyes. "I'm overly sensitive about it, I guess." "You're not," he said softly. "And you're not an airhead. Anyone who can memorize 2 hours worth of lines, plus all the movement that goes with it, plus what everyone else is doing, not to mention create an entire character from thin air, is not an airhead." "Thanks." She gave him a watery smile. He smiled back. "Let's finish up here and go see if the mangy mutt left me any presents while I've been gone. Lucky for you, I have wood floors." Chapter 16. Much to Matt's surprise, Roswell had managed to restrain himself. He did his business in the parking strip in front of the building, and then led them around the block, pausing to sniff at anything he found interesting. "He's a pretty good dog," Matt said. "In fact, I might miss him when he leaves. If he ever leaves, that is." He gave Erin a light bump with his shoulder. "Maybe I found you a new best friend," she said loftily. "I already have a best friend." Matt reached for her hand. It was a risk, but he had to touch her. He was afraid she'd draw away, but she didn't. As their fingers interlocked, it was as if something fell into place deep inside. the way it always did with Aaron. They walked down the street hand in hand, letting Roswell guide them until they reached the park several blocks from their apartment building. Happy screams came from the playground as children ran among the slides and swings, enjoying the crisp, sunny afternoon. The leaves that had dropped from the hundreds of trees had not been raked yet. Aaron's eyes shone with excitement as they crunched through the thick, ankle-deep carpet of dead leaves. I love that sound. She broke off their handhold and bent to scoop up an armful of leaves. There might be spiders in there, Matt warned. You'd better hope not, she said gleefully as she hurled the armful toward him. Leaves showered around him while Roswell tugged on the leash, jumping and barking as he tried to catch one in his mouth. It's on, Matt said, declaring war as he slid the loop in Roswell's leash up his arm. She gave a little squeal and took off running as Matt gave chase. They ran in circles, stooping to grab leaves to throw at each other, laughing breathlessly. Truce! Aaron finally squealed. She was bent over, still clutching a handful of leaves as she rested her fists on her thighs, panting to catch her breath. Truce, Matt agreed. He came closer and she straightened as he reached to pull bits of gold and red leaves from her hair. The fog from their breath mingled in the chilly air. Aaron's eyes were sparkling and her cheeks glowed pink. His hands stilled in her hair as their eyes met, her rose-gold strands twined in his fingers. She met his eyes and gave him a shy smile as he took a careful, steadying breath and leaned forward, eyes already sliding shut. She met him halfway, her arms slipping around his waist as their lips met. She tasted like cinnamon and apples, and smelled like the faintly dusty smell of dead leaves. Something deep inside of Matt broke free and breathed. A sense of calm washed over him, even as his lips pressed harder on Aaron's, wanting more, seeking more. She responded and let him pull her closer until her body was pressed against his. Her hand moved up his back and tangled in his hair as her lips parted under his to allow him to get even closer. For 1 second, everything was perfect. Then, gotcha! Aaron pulled the collar of his shirt open and dumped her handful of leaves down his back. Better hope there aren't spiders, she sang as she backed away, giggling. Matt's stomach turned to lead. He spun quickly so she couldn't see his face as he untucked the hem of his shirt and shook the leaves out. I'm sorry, she said, laughing. Let me help. She came toward him, but he moved off, forcing a laugh. It's okay. I got it. Disappointment boiled in his gut. You ready to go home? They walked back to their building in silence, and when they reached Aaron's door, she gave him a big smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thanks. I had a great time, she said with forced casualness. Me too. I am sorry about the leaves, she said. I couldn't resist. I figured. He gave her a half smile and turned to go. Matt? He turned back, hoping desperately to hear something more, something meaningful. They looked at each other for a long moment, and finally Aaron bit her lip. Let me know if you want help with the dog. He nodded and loosened his grip on the leash so Roswell could pull him down the hall. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Why had he kissed her? He thought she wanted it. Had he totally misread her? He didn't think so. He knew her too well, knew her body language and the emotions that flashed across her face. She'd wanted him to kiss her. At least she'd wanted it right up until she'd suddenly changed her mind and hadn't wanted it. He slammed his way into his apartment with a growl of frustration. What was she so afraid of? Chapter 17. Aaron had an early rehearsal call the next morning. It was their first day on the stage, and the beginning of Tech Week. An endless cycle of day turning to night while the cast and crew worked out kinks in sets, lighting, sound, costumes, entrances, exits, pacing, and anything else that could and did go wrong. At least she had something to take her mind off Matt. Their kiss had been on a constant loop in her head, forcing her to relive the softness of his lips, contrasting with the roughness of his jaw, the way his breath was hot on her mouth, and the shiver that had run all the way to her toes when he'd pulled her closer. Had he always had such strong arms and she'd never noticed? Thinking of the kiss now sent a yearning pounding through her. But this was Matt. He wasn't what she wanted. Once the novelty wore off, there could only be heartbreak. Scratch that. There was probably heartbreak now. She knew she'd hurt him. Shoving the leaves down his shirt was childish and mean, but it had been the first thing she'd thought of to break up the mood and put some distance between them. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe he'd been as caught up in the moment as she was, and now after he'd had a night to think it over, maybe he felt as unsure as she did. But even as the thought entered her mind, she knew it wasn't true. If Matt was unsure about anything, it wasn't about kissing her. He'd known exactly what he was doing. His doubts would be coming from her reaction. She'd attempted to text him a dozen times, but each time she just stared at the screen, her mind unable to form the right words. What could she say to him? Were they still friends? Or had they crossed the bridge and now it was too late? She sighed and entered the auditorium, taking a seat in the front row. The stage was painted all black and set with a Victorian living room, including a round wood table, a brick fireplace, and a fussy settee of plum upholstery and carved wood. Several pieces were still missing, such as artwork for the fireplace mantel, books for the bookshelves, and the rugs for the floors. Mona, Jerome Kirby, and Sean were standing clustered near the fireplace. Their body language radiated tension. "Whoa, what's going on there?" Jocelyn sat down next to Erin and tilted her head toward the group on the stage. "I don't know. No one's saying a word." More members of the cast filtered in and, noting the subdued atmosphere, took seats near Erin and Jocelyn. After about 10 minutes, Mona stepped to the front of the stage and cleared her throat. "We need to have a brief meeting before we begin today." She shaded her eyes against the stage lights and peered toward the sound booth at the back of the theater. "The crew as well, please." The first rows of seats filled quickly with actors, stage crew, costumers, lighting and sound technicians, and the rest of the small army it took to produce a successful show. Mona waited until everyone was seated and quiet. "Welcome to Tech Week," she announced brightly, waving her arm at the stage. "As you can see, our set is coming along. I know today is supposed to be a tech rehearsal, but I'm hoping to spend the morning on lighting cues and have a full run-through after lunch." Erin raised an eyebrow at Jocelyn. Mona took a deep breath before continuing. "As I'm sure some of you are already aware, Jacob decided to leave us." A ripple of shock spread through the cast and crew, and Erin's heart sank. Turnover among a cast was common, but not this close to opening night. Not when the cast had been working together for months and had, hopefully, gelled into a cohesive group, bound by common purpose and experience. Everyone turned to look at Mitchell, Jacob's understudy. He sat a little apart from the others and kept his head down, evidently finding his phone much more engrossing. "So Mitchell is taking over?" Jocelyn finally asked. Mona shook her head. "We've decided to go in another direction. I've hired a new actor who will be arriving this afternoon, which is why we'll be doing a run-through instead of tech. We'll work this morning on scenes that don't include his character." Erin found her voice. "But it's 7 days. How can we possibly—" "Jacob's replacement is a dedicated professional," Mona interrupted. "I have every confidence he will be ready for opening night." She pinched her lips together in a very Mona-esque indication that the subject was closed. "We have a few more details to work out with regards to lighting, so let's be ready for scene 1 in 15 minutes. She turned her back on the auditorium to resume her conversation with Jerome and Sean. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then people gradually dispersed. I totally called it. Sasha moved seats to plop down beside Aaron. I wish he'd have the guts to quit before now, the moron. Do you think he's trying to sabotage the show? Jocelyn had a worried frown between her eyebrows. I think he's just a jerk, Aaron grumbled. Okay, but what's Mitchell's story? Sasha shot a glance at Mitchell. He hadn't moved and they could hear the music blaring through his headphones. Why isn't he taking over? Please, Jocelyn scoffed. Mitchell can't handle that part and everyone knows it. After another 20 minutes, Mona announced they were ready to begin and the actors took their places on stage. Erin tried to play it cool as she walked through Act 1, pausing at each mark so the lighting technicians could aim and program the lights. But she was rattled. So much depended on the success of this play. Her dad had made it clear if it didn't work out, this could be the end of her acting career. They were almost to the end of Act 2 when a door at the back of the auditorium burst open. Erin did a double take. That's Brennan Avery! Jocelyn gasped. Brennan Avery, as in handsome, rich, Tony Award-winning, face on the cover of every magazine, bona fide Broadway star, Brennan freaking Avery. He had dark shoulder-length hair, dark eyes that glittered under heavy eyebrows, and a firm jawline sporting a day's worth of stubble. He strode gracefully down the aisle, exuding an air of confidence and pure sex appeal. Erin glanced down at her black yoga pants and blue bleach-stained sweatshirt with a sinking feeling. Everyone was grungy during Tech Week. Well, except for Brennan Avery, apparently. He wore designer jeans, a plaid flannel shirt, and tan hiking boots that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Was it too late to run home and change? Or run to the mall and buy an entirely new outfit? And get a makeover while she was at it? A new thought hit her with a jolt. She locked eyes with Jocelyn and knew they were thinking the same thing. I get to kiss him, Erin whispered, in equal part excitement and terror. I hate you, Jocelyn whispered back. You totally have to take a night off during the run so I can understudy. Brennan! Mona hurried forward for a hug. Thanks for coming on such short notice. My pleasure. Brennan's voice resonated around the theater. He was already taking command of the stage, and he wasn't even on it yet. As Mona led them through the introductions, Brennan gave everyone the same measured look. Polite, but non-committal. When he got to Erin, she was surprised to see a tiny spark of interest flare in his eyes. Probably because she played the lead. Maybe he was thinking about kissing her too. Don't be stupid, she told herself firmly. Brennan is already familiar with the script, Mona announced. So how about we dive right in? Brennan, can you note the blocking while we rehearse? Brennan nodded. Ever gorgeous. Oh, I want to run my fingers through his hair, Jocelyn sing-song to Erin as they made their way backstage. Okay, if Erin couldn't have a full makeover in the next 30 seconds, could she at least ditch the practice hoop? Was that too much to ask for? The white slip was lined with rigid hoops in ever-increasing sizes and made her look like a gigantic bell. Not the most attractive look, especially paired with a dingy sweatshirt. But leaving off the hoop wasn't an option. Not only would it be completely unprofessional, Mona would call her out for forgetting her costume, and that would be more embarrassing than just wearing the stupid thing. With a sigh, Erin pulled the skirt on and tied the ribbon at her waist. Ring-a-ding-ding. So, you're Charlotte? A deep voice asked. She turned quickly, sending the hoop swirling around her hips. Brennan was at her side, looking even dreamier and even taller than he had from a distance. She clapped her hands to her sides to stop the swirling hoops. Erin, she corrected automatically. Then she realized he meant her character. I mean, yes, I am. I'm Charlotte. I'm playing Charlotte, she stammered. Heat rushed to her face, and she had never been so grateful for the dim backstage lighting to hide her blush. Brennan gave her a lopsided grin. Nice to meet you. I guess we'll be working together pretty closely for the next few weeks. Something about the way he said closely made her heart race. Uh, yeah, she managed. Let's get started, Mona called from the audience. Brennan was not only familiar with the script, he had most of his lines memorized. Further confirming Aaron's suspicion, this was not a last-minute replacement. Mona had clearly been one step ahead of Jacob. They worked their way through the show at a slower than usual pace, pausing frequently so Brennan could scribble notes on his script. Finally, they reached the first kiss between Charlotte and Heger. Erin's heart was in her throat, and she couldn't get her pulse under control. She made it through her lines without incident, but when Brennan/Heger grabbed her shoulders and turned her to face him, her tension was real. Jacob's eyes were gray and had always been rather cold, but Brennan's were a deep, warm hazel, flecked with brown. He stared at her, sending goosebumps shivering down her arms. Charlotte, you must not say these things anymore. A man in my position. Do you understand? I cannot help myself, Aaron/Charlotte cried, breaking free from his grasp. The poor do not need much to live on, only crumbs from the rich man's table. I do not ask for much affection from those I love, but I do need a little. I cling to the preservation of this little I have been given. Brennan/Heger whirled away, leaving Aaron/Charlotte standing there, bereft. She stared at Brennan's broad back, the black hair curling over the collar of his shirt. As she remembered the intensity of his eyes, she was overwhelmed by a deep, resonating grief, more potent than anything she'd been able to reach with Jacob. The script called for her to whisper a single word, please. But her throat closed, and in that moment, all she could do was clap her hand to her mouth and give voice to a deep cry of anguish that seemed to come from her toes. Brennan didn't hesitate. He turned and crossed to her in 2 long strides. His hands grabbed her shoulders again, but instead of pushing her away, this time he yanked her closer, almost violently. His mouth descended, and what had been a very chaste kiss with Jacob became something else entirely. A wild roaring filled Erin's ears as she clung to him desperately. Cut! Mona hollered from the audience. The spell was broken. Brennan stepped back and let go of Erin's shoulders, while Erin struggled to remember where she was, or even who she was. Mona got up and came to the edge of the stage, beckoning them to come closer. Erin winced. She'd blown it. For a moment, Mona stared at them. Then finally she let out a gigantic breath. I'm almost speechless, she said. I can't. Tears sparkled in her eyes. Yes, just yes, she whispered, placing one hand on her chest almost reverently. Erin, I really connected with Charlotte's vulnerability in a way I hadn't before. You're going to have to bring that same level to all of your scenes. Erin nodded, relieved she'd pulled it off. Looks like we should practice that some more. Brennan threw her a grin. Her lips were still warm from his, and the look in his eyes sent a shiver all the way to her toes. Yes, they definitely should practice some more. Lots more. End of part 3.